The thunder rolled ominously across the sky as Madeline O'Brien clutched her basket of fresh eggs tighter, knowing the market ahead would be far more dangerous than any storm. At 22, she was already bearing the weight of whispers and scorn that followed her through the dusty streets of Eagar, Arizona, in the spring of 1885, all because of the small, telltale swell beneath her faded calico dress. Rain began to fall as Madeline reached the edge of town, her copper hair darkening as it clung to her face. She adjusted her shawl to better cover her stomach, though it did little to conceal the truth from the prying eyes that would soon be upon her. 6 months pregnant and unwed, she had become the subject of vicious gossip in the small frontier settlement. But she needed to sell these eggs, her only source of income since her parents had died last winter, leaving her alone with their small homestead on the outskirts of town. The marketplace was bustling despite the drizzle, with traders hawking everything from dry goods to farm implements under hastily erected canvas awnings. Madeline kept her eyes downcast, moving toward her usual corner where Mrs. Fitzgerald, the baker's wife, would sometimes buy her eggs. The mud sucked at her worn boots as she navigated between stalls, feeling the weight of stares following her progress. "Morning, Miss O'Brien," muttered the blacksmith's son, the only greeting she received as most townsfolk turned away when they saw her approach. She had nearly reached her destination when she heard the familiar, cutting voice of Beatrice Sterling, the banker's wife and self-appointed moral guardian of Eagar. "Well, if it isn't our town disgrace," Beatrice announced loudly enough for nearby shoppers to turn and stare. "Flaunting your sin for all to see." Madeline felt her cheeks burn but continued arranging her eggs on the small folding table she'd brought. "I'm just trying to make a living, Mrs. Sterling." "A living?" Beatrice scoffed, her voice carrying through the marketplace. "Is that what you call it? Decent women don't end up in your condition without a husband." Several onlookers had gathered now, some nodding in agreement, others looking uncomfortable but saying nothing. "Perhaps you should take your wares elsewhere," continued Beatrice, her thin lips curved in a cruel smile. "We're God-fearing people in this town." Madeline's hands trembled as she tried to ignore the growing crowd. "Please, Mrs. Sterling, I just need to sell these eggs. Who would buy food from hands tainted by sin?" Beatrice moved closer, reaching for Madeline's basket. "You bring shame on all of us decent folk." Madeline pulled back, desperately trying to protect her only means of income. "Don't. I believe those eggs belong to the lady." A deep voice cut through the tension, and the crowd parted. A tall man stood there, rain dripping from the brim of his dark Stetson. His face was weathered and tanned beneath a few days' growth of beard, and piercing blue eyes regarded the scene with quiet intensity. He wore a long duster over well-worn clothes, with a gun belt slung low on his hips, clearly a cowboy passing through, not one of the local ranch hands Madeline knew by sight. "This isn't your concern, stranger," Beatrice said stiffly, clearly taken aback by his intervention. "I disagree." The man stepped forward, positioning himself between Madeline and her tormentor. "Seems to me you're harassing my wife." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Madeline stared at the stranger, wide-eyed and speechless. "Your wife?" Beatrice echoed incredulously, looking between them. "I've never seen you before in my life." The cowboy smiled, though his eyes remained hard. "Name's Caleb Yates. Been working cattle drives up north. Finally saved enough to send for her." He turned to Madeline with a familiarity that made her breath catch. "Sorry it took so long, darlin'. Wasn't right, leaving you to face these good people alone." For a heartbeat, Madeline couldn't respond, caught in the stranger's intense gaze that seemed to say, "Play along." Then she found her voice. I told them you'd come." "Well, this is," Beatrice sputtered, clearly thrown by this unexpected development. "This is me buying my wife's eggs," the cowboy Caleb finished, pulling coins from his pocket and placing them in Madeline's palm. His fingers were warm against her rain-chilled skin. "All of them. And I'll be taking her home now, if you don't mind. She shouldn't be out in this weather." He gathered up the basket with one hand and gently took Madeline's elbow with the other. The crowd parted silently, their expressions a mixture of surprise and suspicion. As they walked away, Madeline's heart hammered in her chest. "Why did you do that?" she whispered, acutely aware of his hand still steadying her on the muddy street. "Looked like you needed help," he replied simply, guiding her toward the edge of town. "And I never could stomach a bully." "But you don't even know me," she said, stealing a glance at his profile. "I know enough." His eyes met hers briefly. "I know what it's like to be judged unfairly." They had reached the outskirts of town, and Madeline realized she had no idea where he was leading her or what his true intentions might be. Alarm flashed through her, and she stopped abruptly. "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Yates, but I can manage from here." He released her arm immediately, handing back the basket of eggs. "Of course. I didn't mean to frighten you." He glanced back toward town. "But those vultures will be watching. Let me at least walk you to your property line, make this look believable." Madeline hesitated, studying him. Despite his rough appearance, there was something in his eyes that spoke of genuine concern rather than threat, and he was right, the townsfolk would be watching. "My cabin is just beyond that rise," she said, nodding toward the east. "It's not much." They walked in silence for several minutes, the rain tapering off and leaving the scent of wet sage in the air. As they crested the small hill, her modest homestead came into view, a small log cabin with a lean-to stable beside it, a chicken coop, and a tiny vegetable garden surrounded by a split-rail fence. "You live here alone?" Caleb asked, surveying the property. "Since my parents died of influenza last winter." Madeline paused at the gate. "It's been difficult." Caleb's expression softened. "I'm sorry about your folks." He glanced toward town again. "And about the rest, folks can be cruel." "They weren't always," Madeline said quietly. Before, she gestured vaguely to her stomach. "The baby's father," Madeline looked away. "He was passing through, said he loved me, said he'd send for me once he found work in California." Her laugh held no humor. "That was 7 months ago." Caleb nodded, his expression unreadable. "Well, I've imposed on you enough, Miss O'Brien." He tipped his hat. "Good luck to you." As he turned to leave, Madeline called after him. "Where will you go?" He shrugged. "Was heading to the saloon to find work. Need something to tide me over till spring roundup." Madeline bit her lip, an idea forming that was either brave or foolish, possibly both. "Mr. Yates, I have a proposition for you." He turned back, eyebrows raised. "My stable needs fixing before winter, and I can't manage it in my condition. I could offer you lodging in the lean-to and meals in exchange for repairs." She rushed on before she lost her nerve. "And if you wouldn't mind continuing this charade when we're in town, it would make my life considerably easier." Caleb studied her for a long moment. "You trust a stranger to stay on your property? A man you just met?" "No," Madeline admitted, "but I'm desperate enough to take the chance. And you did stand up for me when no one else would." A slow smile spread across his face, transforming his weather-beaten features. "Well, Mrs. Yates," he said, emphasizing the false name, "looks like you've got yourself a hired hand." As they walked toward the cabin, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the edge of town, or the way Beatrice Sterling's eyes narrowed at the sight of them disappearing over the hill together. The first night was awkward, with Madeline preparing a simple stew while Caleb arranged his bedroll in the lean-to attached to the stable. They ate mostly in silence, stealing curious glances at each other across the rough-hewn table. "This is good," Caleb said, breaking the quiet. "Been a while since I've had a home-cooked meal. It's nothing special." Madeline pushed a potato around her bowl. "I wish I had more to offer. Don't apologize. Cowboys don't get picky about food." He finished his stew and set his spoon down. "So tell me about this town, always this friendly." Madeline's lips curved in a slight smile. "Eagar has its charms when you're not carrying a child out of wedlock," she sighed. "It was different when my parents were alive. My father was respected. He helped found this settlement 20 years ago, but after they died, well, I made poor choices in my grief." Caleb nodded, not pressing for details. "Town's got a short memory for the good and a long one for the bad." "And you?" Madeline asked. "What brings a cowboy to Arizona territory in October? Most cattle drives are finished by now." "Got separated from my outfit after some trouble in Prescott." His face darkened momentarily. "Thought I'd winter somewhere quiet before heading to Texas in the spring." Something in his tone suggested there was more to the story, but Madeline didn't press. They all had secrets after all. "Well, there's plenty to keep you busy here," she said, standing to clear the dishes. "The roof leaks in 3 places. The chicken coop needs reinforcing against coyotes, and the stable," she broke off as a sharp pain gripped her abdomen, making her gasp. Caleb was on his feet instantly. "What is it?" "The baby," Madeline breathed through the discomfort until it passed. "Just a false pain. The midwife says it happens sometimes." She straightened slowly. "I'm fine." Caleb didn't look convinced but returned to his seat. "When's the baby due?" "Late January, according to Mrs. Wilson. She's the midwife." Madeline rested a hand on her swollen middle. "I pray it comes in a mild spell. Winter births are dangerous." "You've thought about names?" The question surprised her. Few people asked about her baby with anything but judgment in their voices. "Margaret for a girl, after my mother for a boy." She hesitated. "I haven't decided." Caleb nodded, then stood and collected his hat. "I should let you rest. Dawn comes early and I want to assess that roof before the next rain." As he headed for the door, Madeline called after him. "Mr. Yates," he turned. "Thank you. Not just for today, but for talking about the baby like it isn't something shameful." Something flickered in his eyes, understanding perhaps, or some memory of his own. "Nothing shameful about new life, Miss O'Brien, no matter how it comes into this world." With that, he stepped out into the cool night air, leaving Madeline to wonder what kind of man she had invited into her life. The next morning, Madeline woke to the sound of hammering. She dressed quickly and went outside to find Caleb already at work on the chicken coop, reinforcing it with fresh planks he must have salvaged from her woodpile. "You're up early," she called, wrapping her shawl tighter against the morning chill. Caleb looked up, a nail held between his lips. He removed it to speak. "Figured I'd earn my keep." He gestured to the coop. "Had a visitor last night, fox or coyote trying to get at your chickens. Thought I'd better secure this first." "Thank you." Madeline walked closer, observing his handiwork. "You seem to know what you're doing." "Grew up on a farm in Missouri before I took to cowboying. Some skills you don't forget." He hammered in another nail with swift, sure strokes. "I'll check the roof after this. Saw some loose shingles yesterday." Madeline nodded, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look, her hair hastily pinned up and her dress wrinkled. "I'll make breakfast." As she turned to go, Caleb said, "I rode into town at first light, picked up some supplies." He nodded toward a small burlap sack by the cabin door. "Nothing fancy, just coffee, flour, and such." Madeline stared at him, surprised and touched by the gesture. "You didn't have to do that. Consider it my contribution to our arrangement." His blue eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. "Can't have people thinking I don't provide for my wife." The way he said wife sent an unexpected warmth through her, reminding her how long it had been since anyone had looked out for her. "You're right," she agreed, playing along. "What kind of husband would that make you? A poor one, and I've got a reputation to maintain." He winked, then returned to his work, leaving Madeline with a strange fluttering in her chest that had nothing to do with the baby. Over the next week, Caleb proved himself to be an industrious worker. He patched the roof, reinforced the stable, and even managed to repair the broken wagon wheel that had been sitting useless since spring. Madeline found herself watching him often as he worked, admiring the strength in his shoulders and the care he took with each task. Their evenings fell into a comfortable routine. Madeline would cook, and they would share the meal together, talking about the day's work or exchanging stories about their lives before Eagar. Caleb told her about growing up in Missouri, about his parents' farm and the drought that forced them to sell, about his years on cattle drives that took him from Montana to Mexico. In turn, Madeline shared memories of her childhood in Eagar, of her father's dreams to make something of this frontier settlement, and her mother's gentle wisdom that still guided her. "She would be disappointed in me now," Madeline admitted one evening, her hand resting on her belly. "She raised me better than to fall for pretty words from a handsome stranger." "I doubt that," Caleb said, stoking the fire against the increasing autumn chill. "Sounds like she was a woman who understood that people make mistakes. That's different from being disappointed." "You speak as if from experience," Madeline observed. Caleb's expression grew distant. "Let's just say I've made my share of mistakes. Some you can fix, others you just learn to live with." Before she could ask more, there was a knock at the door, unusual at this hour. Caleb's hand moved instinctively to his gun belt hanging by the door as Madeline rose to answer it. On the porch stood Mrs. Wilson, the midwife, her kind face lined with concern. "Evening, Madeline. Sorry to disturb you so late, but I was checking on the Jenkins baby up the road and thought I'd stop by." "Of course, come in." Madeline stepped aside, suddenly aware of how this domestic scene with Caleb might appear. Mrs. Wilson entered, her eyes widening at the sight of the cowboy by the fire. "Oh, I didn't realize you had company." "Agnes Wilson, this is Caleb Yates," Madeline said, deciding honesty was best with the woman who would deliver her child. "He's helping with repairs around the homestead." Caleb nodded respectfully. "Madam." The midwife looked between them, a knowing expression crossing her face. "I see. Well, that's good. This place needs a man's touch." She turned to Madeline. "I actually came to check on you, dear. How have you been feeling? Any more pains like you mentioned last time?" "A few, but nothing serious." Madeline led her to the table. "Would you like some tea?" "No, thank you. I won't stay long." Mrs. Wilson glanced at Caleb again. "Perhaps we could speak privately. I'll check on the horses," Caleb said immediately, grabbing his coat. "Take your time, ladies." Once he was gone, Mrs. Wilson turned to Madeline with raised eyebrows. "So he's helping with repairs, is he? The whole town's talking about your husband who suddenly appeared." Madeline flushed. "It's not what you think. He was kind enough to help me at the market when Mrs. Sterling was being difficult. The wife's story was his idea to make them leave me alone. And now he's living here." The midwife's tone was concerned rather than judgmental. "Madeline, you have to be careful. A single woman in your condition." "He stays in the lean-to," Madeline assured her. "And he's been nothing but respectful. I don't know what I would have done without his help these past days." Mrs. Wilson studied her face. "You like him." It wasn't a question, and Madeline couldn't deny it. "He's been kind when few others have, but he'll be gone by spring." She changed the subject quickly. "Now, about these pains." The midwife examined her, declaring everything progressing normally, but warned Madeline to rest more and avoid heavy lifting. As Mrs. Wilson prepared to leave, she hesitated at the door. "The man seems decent enough from what little I saw. But be careful with your heart, Madeline. It's already been broken once this year." After she left, Caleb returned, stomping his boots to warm his feet. "Everything all right?" "Yes," Madeline said, not meeting his eyes. "The baby is fine." "Good." He hung his coat by the door. "You should know we had a visitor at the stable, too. Man named Harold Jenkins. Said he's the deacon at the church." Madeline groaned. "What did he want to invite us to services on Sunday?" Caleb's mouth quirked. "Seemed mighty interested in seeing proof of our marriage." "I was afraid of this." Madeline sank into a chair. "They're suspicious." "I told him we'd be pleased to attend," Caleb said, surprising her. "Figured it would look stranger if we refused. You want to go to church together?" The idea was both terrifying and oddly appealing. "That means facing the entire town." "Exactly." Caleb sat across from her. "If we're going to sell this story, we can't hide out here forever. Besides," he added with a grin, "I'm curious to see this Mrs. Sterling in her Sunday best." Despite her nerves, Madeline laughed. "She does wear the most ridiculous hats. Then it's settled." Caleb stood and stretched, the firelight casting his shadow large against the cabin wall. "Sunday, we face the lions in their den." That night, lying in bed, Madeline thought about what Mrs. Wilson had said. She did like Caleb perhaps too much. In just a week, his presence had transformed her lonely existence, bringing not just practical help but companionship she hadn't realized how desperately she'd missed. But she couldn't forget that he was leaving come spring. And she couldn't risk giving her heart to another man who would eventually ride away, leaving her alone once more, this time with a child. Sunday morning dawned clear and cold. Madeline, dressed in her best dress, a navy blue wool that had belonged to her mother and had been let out to accommodate her growing belly. She pinned her copper hair carefully, wishing she had a proper hat or bonnet to complete the outfit. When she emerged from the cabin, she found Caleb waiting with the wagon, dressed in clean clothes and freshly shaved, his dark hair slicked back with water. He looked different without his beard, younger somehow, and even more handsome. "You clean up well, Mr. Yates," she said, trying to sound casual. "As do you, Mrs. Yates." He helped her up to the wagon seat, his hands strong and sure at her waist. "You look beautiful." The simple compliment brought color to her cheeks. "Thank you." The short journey to town was tense with anticipation. As they approached the white clapboard church at the center of Eagar, Madeline could see knots of people gathered outside, their conversation falling silent as the wagon came into view. "Ready?" Caleb asked quietly, drawing the horses to a halt. Madeline took a deep breath. "As I'll ever be." He jumped down and came around to help her, purposefully placing a hand at the small of her back as they walked toward the church steps. The gesture was possessive, protective, and entirely for show, Madeline reminded herself, even as she leaned into his touch. "Well, well," came Beatrice Sterling's voice as they approached, "if it isn't the happy couple." The banker's wife stood with her husband and several other prominent townspeople, wearing, as predicted, an enormous hat adorned with ostrich feathers. "Good morning, Mrs. Sterling," Caleb said pleasantly, tipping his hat. "Lovely day for worship, isn't it?" Beatrice's smile was tight. "Indeed." "We're all eager to welcome you properly to our community, Mr. Yates. It's so unexpected to discover that our Madeline had a husband all this time." "Life is full of surprises, madam." Caleb's arm slid around Madeline's waist. "Isn't that right, darling?" Madeline forced a smile. "Yes, quite full." Deacon Jenkins approached, Bible in hand. "Welcome, welcome. We're delighted you could join us today." He shook Caleb's hand vigorously. "I was just telling my wife how pleased we are to see young Madeline properly settled at last." The implication was clear. and Madeline felt Caleb stiffen beside her. "My wife has always been properly settled, Deacon," he said, his tone still pleasant though his eyes had hardened. "She just had to wait for me to make good on my promises." Before Jenkins could respond, the church bell rang, calling the congregation inside. "Shall we?" Caleb guided Madeline toward the door, whispering in her ear, "Hold your head high. You've done nothing wrong." His confidence steadied her, and she managed to walk into the church with dignity despite the whispers that followed them down the aisle. They took a seat near the back, Caleb's warm presence beside her a comfort against the curious stares. The service seemed interminable, with Reverend Parker delivering a sermon on the sanctity of marriage and the sins of the flesh that seemed pointedly directed at their pew. Caleb's jaw tightened more than once, but he remained outwardly calm, even joining in the hymns with a surprisingly pleasant baritone. When it was finally over, they stood to leave, only to find their path blocked by Beatrice Sterling and her husband, along with the Reverend and several other church elders. "Mr. and Mrs. Yates," Reverend Parker said, his voice carrying so others could hear. "We'd be honored if you'd join us for Sunday dinner at the Sterling home. A small welcome for our newest resident." It was clearly a trap, but refusing would only fuel suspicion. "That's very kind," Caleb said smoothly, "but I'm afraid my wife needs her rest. The journey from town taxes her in her condition." "Oh, but we insist," Beatrice interjected. "It's not often we get to celebrate a marriage we didn't even know had occurred." Her smile was all teeth. "And we're all so curious to hear about your wedding day. Where was it held? Who performed the ceremony?" Madeline felt panic rising. They hadn't prepared for such detailed questioning. Caleb's hand found hers, squeezing reassuringly. "We were married in Prescott last spring before I headed north for the cattle drive. Judge Williams performed the ceremony. Small affair, just us and a couple witnesses." "Judge Williams," the banker, Henry Sterling, raised an eyebrow. "I don't recall a judge by that name in Prescott." "Retired circuit judge," Caleb elaborated without missing a beat. "Friend of my father's, has a small ranch outside town now." Madeline marveled at how easily the lies came to him, each one building a more convincing picture. "I'd love to see your marriage certificate sometime," Beatrice said sweetly. "For the town records, you understand." "Of course," Caleb agreed. "Once we've unpacked all our things, now if you'll excuse us." He guided Madeline past them and out into the sunlight, maintaining a calm facade until they reached their wagon. "That went well," he muttered as he helped her up. "They don't believe us," Madeline whispered back. "And now they want proof we don't have." Caleb climbed up beside her, taking the reins. "Let me worry about that. You did fine." They rode home in silence, both lost in thought about the web of deception that was growing more complex by the day. As they approached the cabin, Caleb finally spoke. "We need to be prepared for more questions. They won't let this go easily." "What do you suggest?" Madeline asked, dreading the answer. "We need to know each other better, the kind of details married couples would know." He looked at her seriously. "Your favorite color, how you take your coffee, where we met, how I proposed, everything." Madeline nodded slowly, seeing the logic. "A crash course in being married." "Exactly." He pulled the wagon to a halt. "Starting now." That afternoon, as rain began to fall again, they sat before the fire exchanging life stories, creating a shared history that would withstand scrutiny. Caleb was methodical, making sure they aligned on every detail. "So we met last spring when I was passing through with a herd bound for the railroad at Holbrook," he recited. "You were in town selling eggs, just like the day I found you at the market. And you asked to call on me that evening," Madeline continued. "My parents were still alive then, they liked you right away." We courted for 2 weeks before I had to move on with the herd, Caleb added. But I couldn't bear to leave without making you my wife, so we traveled to Prescott and were married by a judge. Then you continued north with the promise to send for me once you'd saved enough money. But your parents fell ill, so you stayed to care for them. And after they died, I discovered I was expecting. Madeline placed a hand on her stomach. I wrote to tell you, but the letters must have gone astray. When I finally received word, I came as quickly as I could. Caleb nodded, satisfied with their story. Simple, close to the truth in parts, and difficult to disprove. Except for the marriage certificate they want to see, Madeline reminded him. Caleb's eyes twinkled. Leave that to me. I know someone in Holbrook who's handy with a pen. You're going to forge a marriage certificate. Madeline was shocked. That's illegal. So is falsely claiming to be married, he pointed out. In for a penny, in for a pound. Madeline bit her lip, torn between anxiety about breaking the law and relief that Caleb had a solution. Now, he continued, tell me your favorite color. Husbands know these things. Blue, she answered. Like the sky just after sunset when the first stars appear. Poetic, he said with a smile. Mine's green, like new grass in spring. They continued this exchange of personal details until late in the evening, learning about each other's childhoods, preferences, fears, and dreams. With each revelation, Madeline felt herself drawn deeper into the fantasy. They were creating a fantasy where Caleb truly was her husband, where their child was his, where he would stay beyond the coming spring. It was a dangerous fantasy, she knew, but as darkness fell and the fire burned low, she allowed herself to imagine it might somehow become real. The next morning, Caleb rode to Holbrook, returning 2 days later with a convincingly official-looking marriage certificate and supplies for winter. The document listed their names, a date from the previous spring, and the signature of a Judge Samuel Williams of Prescott, Arizona Territory. This should satisfy even Mrs. Sterling, he said, showing it to Madeline. She traced the elaborate script with her finger. It looks so real. That's the idea. He rolled it carefully and tied it with a string. Keep it somewhere safe but accessible. They're bound to ask for it sooner rather than later. His prediction proved accurate. The very next day, Beatrice Sterling and Reverend Parker appeared at their door, ostensibly bringing a welcome basket from the church ladies but clearly intent on investigating further. What a charming home, Beatrice said, her eyes scanning every corner of the cabin as she entered. So rustic. Thank you for the basket, Madeline said, placing it on the table while Caleb invited their visitors to sit. It's very kind. The least we could do for newlyweds, Reverend Parker said. Though I must admit, we were all surprised to discover Madeline had married. She never mentioned a husband in all these months of difficulty. Pride, I expect, Caleb said, taking Madeline's hand. She didn't want anyone's pity while waiting for me. Yes, Beatrice murmured, unconvinced. Reverend Parker was just saying how unfortunate it is that we didn't get to celebrate your union properly. A wedding is such an important sacrament. Which is why, the Reverend added, leaning forward earnestly, I'd like to offer to perform a blessing ceremony for you both this Sunday. A way to recognize your marriage before God and the community. Madeline froze, recognizing the trap. If they refused, it would seem suspicious. If they agreed, they'd be perpetuating their lie in the most sacred setting possible. Caleb squeezed her hand. That's very thoughtful, Reverend. We'd be honored. Wonderful, the clergyman beamed. And of course, we'll need to record your marriage in our church registry. You do have your certificate, I presume? As a matter of fact, we do. Caleb stood and went to the shelf where Madeline had stored the forged document. He presented it with confidence. Judge Williams was most thorough. Reverend Parker examined the certificate closely while Beatrice peered over his shoulder. Madeline held her breath, her heart hammering as she waited for them to spot some flaw. Finally, the Reverend nodded. "Everything appears to be in order. I'll make a copy for our records before Sunday." "You're welcome to keep that one," Caleb offered generously. "We have another copy for our personal records." The lie came so easily to him that Madeline had to suppress a gasp. There was no second copy. "How thoughtful," Beatrice said, her smile tight. "Well, we won't impose on your hospitality any longer. Sunday after services, then." After they left, Madeline turned to Caleb in panic. "A blessing ceremony, in front of the whole town. And you gave them our only proof of marriage." "Calm down," he said soothingly. "My friend in Hallbrook made 2 copies. I kept the second one in my saddlebag." Relief flooded her, followed quickly by wariness. "You're very good at this deception." Something flickered in his eyes. Was it hurt? "Not by choice, Madeline. But when you've lived the kind of life I have, you learn to think ahead." "And what kind of life is that exactly?" she pressed, suddenly realizing how little she truly knew about this man who had become such a central part of her existence. Caleb sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "One where I've had to reinvent myself more than once. One where I've made mistakes and had to live with the consequences." "What kind of mistakes?" She held her breath, afraid of his answer. He was quiet for a long moment, then said, "The kind that follow you, but nothing that should worry you." His expression softened. "I promise you, Madeline, I would never bring trouble to your door." She wanted to believe him, needed to believe him, so she nodded and changed the subject. "What will we do about Sunday?" "We'll go, we'll smile, we'll accept their blessing, and we'll continue as we have been." He took her hands in his. "Do you trust me?" Looking into his blue eyes, Madeline realized that against all odds and common sense she did trust him. "Yes, then we'll be fine." He squeezed her hands gently. "Now, I believe I promised to split more firewood before the snow comes." As he headed outside, Madeline watched him go, wondering what secrets he carried and why, despite everything, she felt safer with him than she had in a very long time. The blessing ceremony on Sunday was mercifully brief. After the regular service, Reverend Parker called them to the front of the church and said a prayer over their union, asking God to bless their marriage and the child that would soon join their family. Caleb held Madeline's hand throughout, his thumb stroking her palm in a gesture that seemed more genuine than performative. When the Reverend asked them to face each other and renew their commitment, Caleb looked into Madeline's eyes with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I, Caleb Yates, reaffirm my promise to love, honor, and protect you, Madeline, and our child, for all the days of my life." The words, though spoken as part of their charade, held a ring of truth that brought tears to Madeline's eyes. When it was her turn, she found herself saying the words with unexpected emotion. "I, Madeline O'Brien Yates, reaffirm my promise to love, honor, and cherish you, Caleb, for all the days of my life." For a moment, as they gazed at each other before the congregation, the pretense fell away, and Madeline felt as though they were truly making vows from the heart. The moment broke when Reverend Parker pronounced a blessing, and the congregation applauded politely. As they walked back down the aisle, Madeline saw various expressions on the faces they passed, some genuine happiness, some lingering skepticism, and, on Beatrice Sterling's face, clear disappointment that her trap had failed. The following weeks brought the first snow to Eagar, blanketing the landscape in white and making trips to town more difficult. Caleb had finished most of the essential repairs to the homestead and had begun cutting and storing extra firewood for the winter ahead. Despite the cold, Madeline found herself more content than she had been in months, her days filled with purpose, and her evenings warmed by Caleb's company. They still maintained separate sleeping quarters, Caleb in the lean-to stable and Madeline in the cabin, but they spent most waking hours together. They shared meals, stories, and occasionally, when the work was done, games of checkers by the fire. Sometimes, Caleb would read aloud from one of the few books Madeline owned, his deep voice bringing the words to life in the flickering firelight. In these quiet moments, Madeline could almost forget that their arrangement was temporary, that come spring he would ride away. Almost. As her pregnancy progressed, her movements became more awkward, and Caleb took on more of the household chores without being asked. He insisted she rest more, especially after Mrs. Wilson's warnings about her health. One afternoon, he returned from town with a rocking chair he'd purchased from the general store. "For you," he said simply, placing it near the fire. "Thought it might be more comfortable than those straight-back chairs." Madeline ran her hand along the smooth wood, touched beyond words by his thoughtfulness. "It's perfect, thank you." "Just being practical," he said with a shrug, though his eyes told a different story. "A comfortable mother means a content baby." As she settled into the chair, feeling its gentle motion soothe her aching back, Madeline realized how thoroughly Caleb had integrated himself into her life, and how empty that life would feel when he was gone. That night, as snow fell heavily outside, Madeline woke to a sharp pain that made her gasp. She lay still, waiting to see if it would return, and when it did several minutes later, fear gripped her. It was too soon for the baby, over a month too soon. When the third pain came, stronger than the others, she knew she needed help. Wrapping her shawl around her nightdress, she made her way to the door, intending to call for Caleb. But as she reached for the latch, the door swung open and he stood there, snow dusting his shoulders and hat. "Madeline," his eyes widened at the sight of her clutching her stomach. "What's wrong?" "Pains," she managed, grimacing as another seized her. "Something's not right, the baby, it's too early." Without hesitation, Caleb swept her into his arms and carried her back to her bed. "How long?" "How far apart?" "Not long, just a few minutes." She clutched his arm as another wave of pain washed over her. "I'm afraid, Caleb." "Don't be." His voice was calm, though his eyes betrayed his concern. "I'm going for Mrs. Wilson. Will you be all right for a short while?" Madeline nodded, forcing herself to breathe deeply as he had taught her when they first met. "Yes. Hurry." Caleb pressed a kiss to her forehead, their first such intimate contact, and was gone, leaving Madeline to count the minutes between pains and pray for her child's safety. It seemed an eternity before she heard the sound of horses outside and then voices, Caleb's and Mrs. Wilson's, at the door. The midwife hurried to Madeline's side, her experienced hands examining, measuring, assessing. "False labor," she pronounced finally, relief evident in her voice. "Strong, but not the real thing. Your body is practicing." "The baby is safe?" Madeline asked weakly. "For now, yes, but these pains are a warning." Mrs. Wilson looked up at Caleb, who hovered anxiously by the door. "She needs complete rest for at least a week. No chores, no exertion." "The baby is trying to come too soon, and we need to convince it to stay put a while longer." Caleb nodded gravely. "I'll see to it." "Good man," the midwife said, patting his arm. "Now I've brought some herbs for tea that will help calm the womb. Brew it fresh 3 times a day." After Mrs. Wilson left, promising to return the next day, Caleb pulled a chair to Madeline's bedside. "You heard the lady. Complete rest. But the chores, I'll manage." His expression brooked no argument. "Your only job is to keep that little one safe inside a while longer." Madeline looked at him, this man who had appeared in her life so suddenly and now seemed indispensable. "Why do you care so much?" "About me, about the baby." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on some distant point. When I was 19, a girl I knew found herself in trouble, as they say. The man responsible abandoned her. His jaw tightened. She tried to handle it alone, hiding her condition, working too hard. The baby came too early. Neither survived. Madeline reached for his hand. I'm so sorry. I always wondered if things might have been different if she'd had help, if someone had been there for her. He met Madeline's gaze, his blue eyes intense. I couldn't help her then, but I can help you now. Was she? Madeline hesitated, not sure if she wanted the answer. Was she someone special to you? My sister, he said softly. My younger sister, Emily. The revelation stunned her. In all their conversations about family, he had never mentioned a sister. I didn't know. It's not something I talk about often. He squeezed her hand. But now you understand why I won't let anything happen to you or your child. In that moment, Madeline saw Caleb clearly for the first time, not as the convenient protector who had appeared at the market, or the handsome cowboy who made her heart flutter, but as a man carrying his own burdens of guilt and grief, seeking redemption in her salvation. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. He nodded, then stood, releasing her hand. Try to sleep. I'll be right outside if you need anything. As he left, closing the door softly behind him, Madeline realized with startling clarity that she was falling in love with Caleb Yates. And that knowledge was both wonderful and terrifying. True to his word, Caleb took over all the household duties while Madeline rested. He cooked simple but nourishing meals, kept the fire stocked, tended the livestock, and even attempted to launder her clothes, though she gently took that task back after seeing the results of his first effort. Mrs. Wilson visited daily, checking Madeline's progress and pronouncing herself satisfied with her recovery. The false labor pains had subsided, and the midwife was cautiously optimistic that the baby would stay put until closer to the expected time. You're fortunate to have such an attentive husband, Mrs. Wilson remarked one afternoon as she prepared to leave. Many men would be useless in such circumstances. Madeline felt a pang of guilt at the deception, but she nodded. Yes, I am fortunate. As December deepened, bringing colder temperatures and more snow, Caleb allowed Madeline to resume light activities around the cabin. They settled into a new routine, with Caleb handling the outdoor chores while Madeline managed the indoor ones, resting frequently as he insisted. One evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Caleb cleared his throat awkwardly. Christmas is coming soon. Is there anything special you'd like to do? The question caught Madeline by surprise. With everything that had happened, she had scarcely thought about the holiday. I haven't celebrated properly since my parents died. Last year I was alone and newly with child. It didn't seem right to celebrate. All the more reason to make this year special, Caleb said. If you're feeling up to it, that is. Madeline smiled, warmed by his thoughtfulness. I'd like that. We always had a small tree when I was growing up, and my mother would make gingerbread. Then we shall have both, Caleb declared. I'm no baker, but I can certainly find a suitable pine. 2 days later, he returned from the forest with a perfect young pine, just the right size for the cabin's corner. Together, they decorated it with the few ornaments Madeline had saved from her childhood: painted wooden stars, paper angels, and strings of dried berries. Caleb fashioned a star for the top from scraps of tin, polishing it until it gleamed in the lamplight on Christmas Eve. Mrs. Wilson appeared with a basket of baking, including gingerbread that brought tears to Madeline's eyes for how similar it was to her mother's recipe. The midwife stayed for tea, her kind presence filling the cabin with warmth and normalcy that Madeline had missed. After she left, Caleb produced a small package wrapped in brown paper and string. Merry Christmas. But I don't have anything for you, Madeline protested, distressed. "You've given me a home for the winter," he said simply. "That's more than enough." With trembling fingers, she unwrapped the gift to find a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. "Oh, Caleb," she breathed, opening the empty locket. "It's beautiful. I thought you might want to put a lock of the baby's hair inside when the time comes," he explained, looking uncharacteristically self-conscious. "Or whatever you choose." "Thank you," she said, blinking back tears as she fastened it around her neck. "I'll treasure it always." On impulse, she leaned forward and kissed his cheek, a brief touch that nevertheless sent her heart racing. When she pulled back, Caleb's eyes were dark with an emotion she couldn't, or perhaps didn't dare name. The moment stretched between them, taut with possibility until the fire popped loudly, breaking the spell. Caleb cleared his throat and stood, moving to stoke the flames. "It's getting late," he said, his voice slightly rough. "You should rest." That night, as snow fell softly outside her window, Madeline lay awake, her fingers tracing the smooth surface of the locket at her throat. She had fallen in love with Caleb Yates, completely and irrevocably. But did he feel the same? And even if he did, would it be enough to make him stay when spring called him back to the open range? She had no answers, only the knowledge that her heart, so recently broken, was once again at risk. The new year arrived with a blizzard that kept them housebound for days. As January progressed, Madeline grew increasingly uncomfortable, her body preparing for the imminent birth. The baby was active, kicking and shifting constantly, much to Caleb's fascination. He would sometimes place a hand on her belly when invited, his expression one of wonder when he felt the strong movements beneath his palm. "Active little one," he commented one evening as they sat before the fire. "Going to be a handful." "Like its father, I suppose," Madeline said without thinking, then froze, realizing her mistake. Caleb's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "I wouldn't know about that." An awkward silence fell between them. They had never discussed the baby's father since that first day, and Madeline had no desire to dwell on the man who had abandoned her. But now, as her time grew near, she found herself wondering what kind of father Caleb might be if circumstances were different. "Have you ever thought about having children of your own?" she asked hesitantly. He was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "Once, a long time ago." "What changed my life?" He shrugged, but the casual gesture didn't mask the sadness in his voice. "A cowboy's life isn't suited for family. Always moving, never settling. It wouldn't be fair to a wife or children." "But if you weren't a cowboy, if you found another way to live," Caleb looked at her then, his gaze intense. "Are you asking if I've considered staying, Madeline?" Her heart raced. I wasn't, because I have," he continued, his voice low. "More than I should." Before she could respond, a sharp pain seized her, stronger than any she'd felt before. She gasped, clutching her belly. Caleb was at her side instantly. "Is it time?" Madeline nodded, unable to speak as another contraction gripped her. This wasn't false labor. She knew with certainty that her baby was coming. "I'll get Mrs. Wilson," Caleb said, already reaching for his coat. "The blizzard," Madeline managed between breaths. "Hasn't stopped for 3 days," he finished grimly, "but I'll find a way." He knelt beside her chair, taking her hands. "Listen to me. I'll be as quick as I can, but it might take time. Are you all right to wait?" She nodded, fighting through another pain. "No choice." "You're the strongest woman I know, Madeline O'Brien." He squeezed her hands. "Hold on to that strength. I'll be back with help." With a last lingering look, he was gone, the door banging shut behind him as the wind howled its welcome. The next few hours were a blur of pain and waiting. Madeline paced when she could, rested when she couldn't, and tried to remember everything Mrs. Wilson had told her about birthing. She prepared the bed with clean linens, heated water on the stove, and laid out clean cloths and blankets for the baby. As night fell and Caleb still hadn't returned, fear began to creep in. What if he couldn't find Mrs. Wilson? What if he was lost in the storm? What if she had to do this alone? The contractions were coming faster now, more intense. Madeline gripped the edge of the table, breathing through the pain as her mother had once taught her to do when she had broken her arm falling from a horse. "Count through it," she had said. "The pain can only last so long." Just as she began to truly panic, the door burst open, bringing with it a swirl of snow and two snow-covered figures. "Madeline!" Caleb rushed to her side, his face raw from the cold. "Are you all right?" "The baby," she gasped as another contraction seized her. "It's coming soon, Mrs." Wilson was already shedding her outer garments and washing her hands at the basin. "Let's get you to bed, dear. Your husband here nearly killed his horse getting to me, and then practically carried me through snowdrifts to get back to you." As they helped Madeline to the bed, she caught Caleb's eye. "Thank you," she whispered. "Always," he replied, and in that moment she almost believed it could be true. What followed were the most intense hours of Madeline's life. Mrs. Wilson proved her worth 100 times over, her calm efficiency guiding Madeline through the increasingly difficult labor. Caleb remained nearby, bringing water, heating cloths, and holding Madeline's hand through the worst pains when she called for him. As dawn broke on January 15, 1886, Madeline gave one final exhausted push, and her child slipped into the world with a lusty cry. "A boy, Mrs. Wilson announced, quickly wrapping the infant in a warm blanket. "A fine, healthy boy." Tears of joy streamed down Madeline's face as the midwife placed her son in her arms. His tiny face was red and wrinkled, his hands balled into determined fists as he announced his arrival. "He's perfect," she whispered, tracing a finger along his cheek. She looked up to find Caleb watching from the doorway, his expression a mix of awe and something she couldn't quite define. "Would you like to meet him?" she asked softly. Caleb approached slowly, as if afraid to intrude on the sacred moment. When he reached the bedside, he gazed down at the newborn with wonder. "He's amazing," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Just like his mother, Mrs." Wilson bustled about, cleaning up and preparing a strengthening tea for Madeline. "Have you chosen a name?" she asked. Madeline looked at her son, then at Caleb, whose presence had changed everything. "William," she said. "William Caleb O'Brien." Caleb's head snapped up, his eyes wide with surprise. "Madeline, you don't have to, I want to," she said firmly. "Without you, we might not have made it through this winter. He should carry your name, even if," she swallowed hard, "even if you won't be here to see him grow up, Mrs." Wilson looked between them, comprehension dawning. "I'll just step outside for a moment," she said tactfully, slipping from the room. When they were alone, Caleb sat on the edge of the bed, his eyes fixed on the baby. "I don't deserve this honor." "You do," Madeline insisted. "You've been more of a father to him already than his real father ever was." Caleb was silent for a long moment, then asked, "May I hold him?" With careful movements, Madeline transferred the bundle to Caleb's strong arms. The sight of this weathered cowboy cradling her newborn son with such tenderness brought fresh tears to her eyes. "Hello, William," Caleb said softly. "Welcome to the world, little man." The baby quieted, as if recognizing the voice he'd been hearing these past months. Caleb looked up at Madeline, his blue eyes serious. "I meant what I said before about considering staying." Madeline's heart leapt, but she forced herself to be cautious. "Caleb, you don't need to say that just because. It's not because of the baby, though he's certainly a compelling reason." Caleb's gaze was steady. "It's because of you, Madeline. These months with you have been the most peaceful, most meaningful of my life. I don't want to leave come spring. But your life as a cowboy, was the only life I knew how to live after Emily died. I've been running for years, never staying anywhere long enough to feel the loss when I left." He looked down at William, who had fallen asleep in his arms. "Until now." Hope bloomed in Madeline's chest. "What are you saying, Caleb?" "I'm saying I love you, Madeline O'Brien. I'm saying I want to stay if you'll have me. Not as a convenient husband, but as a real one." Tears spilled down Madeline's cheeks as joy unlike anything she'd ever known filled her heart. "I love you too. I have for months." Caleb leaned forward carefully, mindful of the sleeping infant, and pressed his lips to hers in a tender kiss that held all the promise of their future together. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "I should warn you, I'm not the man the town thinks I am. My past isn't as clean as I've made it seem." "Tell me," she said simply. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together." So he did. He told her about his years after Emily's death, about riding with a gang that robbed stage coaches in Colorado, about the night a robbery went wrong and a man was shot. He hadn't pulled the trigger, but he'd been there. He'd fled south, determined to start clean, working honest cattle drives and trying to outrun his past. "The trouble I mentioned in Prescott," he finished, "was a former associate recognizing me. I left before he could spread the word." Madeline listened without judgment, seeing the regret in his eyes. And the man he had become, the man who had stood up for her when no one else would, who had risked his life in a blizzard to bring help for her child, who had shown her what real love could be. "That was another man," she said when he was done. "The Caleb Yates I know is good and honorable and the only father I want for my son." Relief washed over his face. "Then I'll spend the rest of my life being worthy of that trust, Mrs. Wilson chose that moment to return, smiling at the tableau before her. "Everything all right in here?" "Better than all right," Caleb answered, his eyes never leaving Madeline's. "We've decided to make our arrangement permanent." The midwife chuckled. "Took you long enough. I've known you two were in love since that first night I came to check on Madeline." Madeline blushed. "Was it that obvious?" "Only to anyone with eyes, dear." Mrs. Wilson patted her hand. "Now let's get you and this little one settled properly. Your husband can fetch some breakfast." The word husband no longer felt like a lie, even though legally they were not yet married. In their hearts, in all the ways that mattered, they were already a family. In the weeks that followed William's birth, Caleb proved himself an attentive father and partner. He doted on the baby, often getting up in the night to bring him to Madeline for feeding, then walking the floor with him afterward so she could rest. He continued managing the homestead, making plans for spring planting, and discussing the possibility of expanding the chicken coop to increase their egg production. One bright February morning, as sunlight streamed through the cabin windows and Madeline nursed William by the fire, Caleb sat across from her with an unusually serious expression. "There's something we need to discuss," he began. Madeline looked up, a flicker of alarm passing through her. "What is it?" "Our marriage." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, or rather the lack of it. Her heart sank. "Are you having second thoughts?" "The opposite," he said quickly. "I want to make it real, legally real, but to do that I need to come clean about our deception." Madeline considered this. They had successfully convinced the town that they were husband and wife, with William as their child. To admit now that it had all been a lie would mean facing judgment and possible legal consequences. "We could leave," she suggested. "Start fresh somewhere else, get married there." Caleb shook his head. "This is your home, Madeline, your family's land. I won't ask you to give that up." He took her free hand. "Besides, I'm tired of running from the truth. If we're going to build a life together, it should be founded on honesty." She knew he was right. The lie had served its purpose, protecting her when she was vulnerable, but it couldn't be the foundation for their future. "What do you propose?" We go to Reverend Parker, confess everything, and ask him to marry us for real this time. Caleb's thumb traced patterns on her palm. It won't be easy. There will be gossip, possibly worse. But when it's done, we'll be free to live without looking over our shoulders. Madeline looked down at William, peacefully nursing at her breast, then back at the man she loved. All right. Let's do it. 2 days later, they rode into town together, William bundled against the winter chill in a sling across Madeline's chest. They went directly to the church, where they found Reverend Parker in his study. The confession was as difficult as they had anticipated. The Reverend's expression changed from shock to disappointment to anger as Caleb explained their deception, taking full responsibility for the forged marriage certificate and the lies they had told. "What you have done is not only a sin against God but a crime against the community," the Reverend said sternly when they had finished. "You've made a mockery of the sacrament of marriage." "We know," Madeline said, holding William closer. "And we're truly sorry, but we've come to make it right." "We're asking you to marry us properly," Caleb added. "We love each other and want to raise our son together." "Our son?" The Reverend raised an eyebrow. "Yes," Caleb said firmly. "William may not be mine by blood, but he is in every other way that matters." Reverend Parker was silent for a long moment, considering them. "Your repentance seems genuine, but there must be consequences for your actions. I will need to discuss this with the church elders." "We understand," Madeline said, though fear clutched at her heart. What if they were ostracized completely? What if Caleb faced legal charges for the forgery? "In the meantime," the Reverend continued, "I suggest you both prepare for public confession before the congregation this Sunday." They left the church with heavy hearts, knowing the difficult days ahead. As they walked down the street, they encountered Beatrice Sterling emerging from the general store. "Well, if it isn't the happy family," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Out for a stroll, Mrs. Sterling," Caleb acknowledged with a nod. "We've just come from seeing Reverend Parker." Something in his tone must have alerted her, for her expression turned calculating. "Oh, nothing wrong, I hope. We've had an honest discussion with him," Madeline said carefully. "As we'll be doing with the congregation on Sunday." Beatrice's eyes widened with barely concealed delight. "I see. Well, I'll be sure to attend. Wouldn't miss it for the world." As she hurried away, no doubt to spread the news, Caleb put his arm around Madeline's shoulders. "It's going to be a long week." Sunday arrived all too quickly. The church was unusually full, word having spread that something momentous would occur. Madeline sat beside Caleb in the front pew, William sleeping peacefully in her arms, aware of the whispers and stares behind them. After the opening hymns, Reverend Parker called them forward. "Caleb Yates and Madeline O'Brien have asked to address the congregation," he announced. "I ask that you listen with Christian charity." Standing before their neighbors and accusers, Caleb took Madeline's hand and began their confession. He explained how they had met, the lie they had told to protect her from public shame, and how their pretense had evolved into genuine love. He accepted full responsibility for the deception, particularly the forged documents, and asked for the community's understanding, if not their forgiveness. When he finished, Madeline spoke, her voice trembling at first but growing stronger. "I know many of you judged me harshly for my condition, and perhaps rightly so. I made a mistake in trusting a man who abandoned me, but in doing so, I found a man worthy of that trust." She looked up at Caleb, drawing strength from his presence. "We stand before you now, not as husband and wife, but as two people who love each other and wish to be joined in marriage before God and this community." A murmur ran through the congregation. Beatrice Sterling's voice rose above it. "This is outrageous. They've lied to all of us for months. They should be run out of town, not rewarded with a wedding." Several voices echoed agreement, but then Mrs. Wilson stood. "If I may speak, Reverend." At his nod, she continued, addressing the congregation. "I've known Madeline since she was born. I delivered her into this world just as I delivered her son. She made a mistake, yes, but haven't we all? The good book tells us to judge not, lest we be judged." She turned to Beatrice. "And you, Mrs. Sterling, were you so perfect before your marriage? I seem to recall a certain incident behind your father's barn with young Henry that hastened your wedding day." Gasps and a few stifled laughs greeted this revelation as Beatrice's face turned crimson. "As for Caleb," Mrs. Wilson continued, "I've watched him care for Madeline and her child with more devotion than many legal husbands show. If that isn't the mark of a good man, I don't know what is." Others began to stand the blacksmith, whose child Madeline had helped nurse through scarlet fever, the storekeeper, to whom she had always paid her debts despite her poverty, the elderly widow whose fence Caleb had mended without being asked. One by one they spoke in support of the couple, until finally, Harold Jenkins, the deacon who had first invited them to church, addressed Reverend Parker. "I believe in redemption, Reverend, and I believe these two have earned a second chance. I move that we grant their request and welcome them properly into our community as husband and wife." Reverend Parker surveyed the congregation, noting that while not everyone seemed convinced, the majority appeared moved by the testimonials. "It seems," he said slowly, "that mercy has carried the day. Caleb Yates and Madeline O'Brien, are you prepared to enter into the covenant of marriage, truthfully this time before God and these witnesses?" "We are," they answered in unison. And so, on that February Sunday in 1886, with William cradled between them, Caleb and Madeline were married. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, their vows an echo of the words they had spoken during the blessing months before, but this time with the full weight of truth behind them. As the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Caleb leaned down to kiss his bride, their first kiss as a legally wedded couple. The congregation applauded, even Beatrice Sterling managing a grudging nod of acceptance. "I love you, Mrs. Yates," Caleb whispered against Madeline's lips. "And I love you, Mr. Yates," she replied, her heart full to bursting with joy. That spring, as the snows melted and new life emerged across the Arizona landscape, Caleb and Madeline Yates began their life together in earnest. With money Caleb had saved from his cowboy days, they purchased additional livestock: a milk cow, 2 horses, and a small herd of sheep that would provide wool to supplement their income from eggs and vegetables. Caleb proved to have a natural talent for farming and animal husbandry, his years of observing the land as a cowboy serving him well as a homesteader. Under his care, the property flourished, expanding beyond the boundaries Madeline's parents had established. William thrived too, growing into a sturdy, cheerful baby with his mother's copper hair and a smile that could melt the hardest heart. Caleb doted on him, spending hours carrying him around the property, pointing out animals and plants, telling him stories of life on the range. "He'll be riding before he walks at this rate," Madeline teased one evening as Caleb bounced William on his knee, the baby giggling with delight. "Best way to grow up," Caleb replied with a grin. "A man should know horses. A man, he's barely 6 months old. Never too early to start planning." Caleb lifted William high, making him squeal. "Isn't that right, partner?" Madeline shook her head, but her heart swelled with love for them both. The sight of Caleb with William never failed to move her, the gentle strength in his hands as he cared for the baby, the softness in his eyes when William fell asleep on his chest, the pride in his voice when he introduced the child as "my son" to visitors. And there were visitors now. Since their wedding, the community had gradually accepted them back into the fold. Mrs. Wilson remained their staunchest ally. But others came, two neighboring farmers seeking Caleb's help with livestock, women from town bringing preserves or knitted items for the baby, even Reverend Parker stopping by occasionally to check on their welfare. Only Beatrice Sterling maintained her distance, still smarting from the public revelation of her own youthful indiscretion. But even she had ceased her open hostility, settling for cool politeness when their paths crossed in town. By summer, Madeline was pregnant again, this time with Caleb's child. When the midwife confirmed what Madeline had already suspected, Caleb's joy knew no bounds. He swept her into his arms, spinning her around the cabin until they were both dizzy with laughter. "Careful," Madeline protested, though she was laughing too. "We don't want to upset this little one before it's even had a chance to grow." "A brother or sister for William," Caleb said wonderingly, placing a hand on her still flat stomach. "Our family is growing, Mrs. Yates." "Yes, it is," she agreed, covering his hand with hers. "Are you happy, Caleb?" "Truly happy with this life." His expression grew serious. "Happier than I ever thought possible. You know what day it is?" Madeline calculated quickly. "August 17th. It's exactly 1 year since I saw you in the marketplace being shamed by that harridan." He pulled her close. "Best day of my life, though I didn't know it then." "Mine too," Madeline whispered, resting her head against his chest, "though I was rather preoccupied at the time." Caleb chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest. "You were magnificent, standing your ground despite everything. That's when I knew you were special. And here I thought you were just being chivalrous." "That too." He kissed the top of her head. "But mostly I was in awe of your courage." They stood like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other's arms, the sounds of their home around them, William babbling in his cradle, chickens clucking in the yard, the distant lowing of the milk cow. "I never thought I'd have this," Caleb said softly. "A home, a family, a place where I belong." "Neither did I," Madeline admitted. "After James left me with child, I thought my life was over, but it was just beginning." "James," Caleb raised an eyebrow, "the baby's father, you've never mentioned his name before." "Because he doesn't matter anymore," Madeline said simply. "You are William's father in every way that counts. James was just a mistake I made along the way." Caleb nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Well, Mrs. Yates, what shall we do with this beautiful summer day?" "I thought we might go on a picnic," Madeline suggested, "down by the creek where it's cool. William loves watching the water." "A perfect plan." Caleb released her reluctantly. "I'll finish the morning chores while you pack the basket." As they prepared for their outing, moving around each other with the easy familiarity of a couple who had built a life together, Madeline reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From shame to redemption, from loneliness to love, from deception to truth, each step had led them to this moment of perfect contentment. Later, as they sat on a blanket by the creek, William sleeping between them after exhausting himself trying to catch butterflies, Caleb reached for Madeline's hand. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For trusting me that day in the marketplace. For giving me a second chance at a decent life." Madeline squeezed his hand, her heart full. "Thank you for saying she's with me when no one else would stand beside me." Caleb leaned over their sleeping son to kiss her, a kiss that held all the promise of their shared future, the children they would raise, the life they would build, the love that had found them both when they needed it most. In the years that followed, the Yates family became one of the most respected in Eagar. Their second child, a daughter they named Emily after Caleb's sister, arrived the following spring. 3 more children joined the family over the next decade, 2 boys and another girl, filling their expanded homestead with laughter and activity. William grew into a fine young man who never questioned that Caleb was his father in all the ways that mattered. Their bond was unshakable, built on years of shared work and love rather than blood. And Caleb, the drifting cowboy who had once believed he wasn't meant for family life, became known throughout the county as a devoted husband and father, a skilled rancher, and a man whose word was his bond. Sometimes, when Madeline watched him with their children teaching William to ride, braiding Emily's hair, rocking the youngest to sleep, she remembered that day in the marketplace when a stranger had stepped forward and changed the course of her life with 4 simple words. "She's with me." Those words, spoken in a moment of kindness, had been the beginning of everything good in her life. And as she joined her husband on the porch after the children were asleep, his arm automatically encircling her shoulders as they gazed at the stars over their home, Madeline knew that some mistakes like the one that had left her unwed and with child could lead to the greatest blessings of all.